Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Désolé pour ce retard. We apologize for the delay, just a technical issue today. Welcome to everyone. Most of you are online today. I would like just to welcome our presenter today, Etienne, Hubert Etienne, and just a brief word to present the rendezvous de l'IA, the talks in AI ethics. So, les rendezvous de l'IA are organized by Inventé, Université de Montréal, and Algora Lab at Mila with Ivado. And those talks on AI ethics are part of broad reflection, broad conversation on the principles of the Montreal Declaration. The Montreal Declaration provides, as you know, ethical guidance for developers and provide rules for the use of AI. But it does not directly address a very specific issue, that is the issue of coding moral machines. One assumption that are usually made by computer scientists is that machines could learn from humans and develop moral skills, or at least mimic moral behavior. But we saw how the TAI experiment by the Microsoft team failed miserably. To refresh your memory, TAI was this chatbot supposed to learn how to behave from interacting with humans. So those interactions were held on Twitter. And the result of the experiments is that TAI became very rapidly racist and sexist within 24 hours. So if we still accept the idea that deep learning could enable a moral machine to learn from human beings, from human opinions, the real question is on which opinions or on what kind of opinions should the machine be trained? How to collect these opinions, how to aggregate them, but also how to produce those opinions, since forming opinions depends on the communication and experiments infrastructure. For instance, how to mitigate bias. So these are the kind of issues that Hubert Etienne will discuss in more detail, but from a different angle. Hubert Etienne is a philosopher. He's completing his PhD in AI ethics and computational philosophy at École Normale Supérieure in Paris and at Meta AI Facebook. He's currently a visiting fellow at Harvard and a visiting researcher at Algora Lab, Mila. So today we're delighted to have him speak about performative quantification, how to build moral opinions when collecting replies. So without further ado, I hand over to him. Thank you, Etienne.
Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Marc-Antoine, for the invitation, the Mila and Algora Lab. I'm very happy to be here today to talk about performative quantification. This is still unpublished work, which I've been conducting with Florian Kova, a colleague at the University of Geneva. And so I will present it for the first time today. Your feedback is really important for us. So I hope we have an interesting question at the end. Before talking about this specific research, I'd like to give you a bit of context around the research. Why did we want to do this one? And it's very linked to the ethics of autonomous vehicles. So just a bit of context around this one. Roughly 10 years ago, Patrick Lin launched the first question asking with this specific dilemma. So picture yourself in a black car and suddenly some large boxes fall in your direction from the truck right above you. You have three options. Either you stay on your course and then it falls on you and everybody in the car dies, or you swerve on the left hitting the motorcycle on the left line, or you swerve on the right and you hit the other motorcycle. Then you can, reconfigure the whole dilemma, putting two people on the left, one on the right, man, woman, you can change the parameters. But the real question of Patrick in here was not about who should die. It was about the fact that if you move from a non-autonomous vehicle to an autonomous vehicle in this specific dilemma, it has tremendous implications in a sense that in the first case, we would consider that people don't have, the driver especially doesn't have any more responsibility, no legal liability, because you don't have the time to make an informal decision here. So you would not be responsible for the consequences. But in the second case, where we're facing an autonomous vehicle, here, this question should have been approached and answered in advance, meaning that some people should have the responsibility in this situation, and then they would be responsible for their choice, and they should be able to justify it. So the change in perspective from non-autonomous vehicle to autonomous vehicle has drastic implication for ethics, and then open the whole field of AV ethics with questions such as who should decide in this situation, which kind of decisions should be made, and many papers were published here. Following this one, I would like to tell you a bit about the approach of the MIT, which I guess most of you are certainly familiar with, but I want to give you a bit more context around this research. 3 researchers from the MIT asked this one. So they started with one basic premise, which I call in another paper the HMI, the highest moral imperative, which is basically the following. There is a moral duty to deploy AVs as soon as possible to prevent as many fatalities as possible. Basically, they say every year in the US, we roughly have 37,500 people dying on the roads because of poor human driving. And so we do have a moral imperative to bring AVs on the roads to save these people. That's the main argument. The premise number 2, that AVs deployment will certainly be conditioned by the necessity to find a solution to the dilemmic situation that we're going to talk about. And so from these 2 premises derives the conclusion, we have a moral duty to find a solution to these as soon as possible to land AVs on the road. I explained in another paper why this doesn't make any sense to me, but this is not the topic of today, so I will leave it to you. What is important is that based on this argument, they say we actually have a framework, a theoretical framework from moral philosophy, which is the famous trolley problem, that could help us frame the question around this in order to have a debate or find different ways to solve this dilemma. And they say the first question was, would people agree with the classic consequentialist view that we tend to say whatever happens in this dilemma, the main point is that we want to save as many people as possible. We want to sacrifice as least people as possible in this dilemma. And then they conducted the first experiments in 2016 on Amazon Mechanical Turk, where they exposed this kind of dilemma to many Turkers, and they found that 75% of the people would actually abide by a consequentialist view, saying that whatever the case, they would say we need to save the greatest number of persons, even if it implies sacrificing people in the car. However, when they then ask the people, fine, would you then buy this kind of cars? And people say, no, we wouldn't buy it. If I buy a car, I expect that beforehand, it's going to save the person in the car first. Otherwise, I don't buy it. So they say, okay, what we're facing here is something we know pretty well. It's a classic social dilemma, what economists call free riding behavior. And the traditional way to address this consists just in implementing the same regulation for everybody. If you extinguish all the possibilities for free riding, that would be fine. But then they conducted another experiment in 2017, and they pretty much asked people, okay, what if we land this kind of cars on the roads? They are consequentialists, and you cannot choose. They have to be consequentialists. Would you buy such cars? And then the respondents say, no, we wouldn't. And here comes the real dilemma for these people, which is that if we delay, if implementing consequentialist rules in this kind of vehicles delay the adoption of autonomous vehicles by the markets, then it would go against the HMI, the highest moral imperative. And so we would take more time and we would sacrifice more people in their view every year on the road. So they found another way to address the issue, which is asking many people what they think about it. This is what most people know about AV ethics, which are the classic, so the moral machine experiment, developed by pretty much the same people, but an extended team at the MIT. based on 9 criteria you have here: human versus pet, passenger versus pedestrian, etc. And they collected 39 million replies on this one. We're doing very fancy analytics, as you can see here, trying to understand if you have like patterns in specific region of the world. They're trying to understand it by cross it to know whether some part of the world were ruled by the rule of law, other differently, some part of the world were traditionally more individualistic, that is other more collectivistic, and they try to find patterns here. I don't want to discuss this one too much. I just wanted to give you one way that they found to solve this kind of dilemma, or to address this kind of dilemma. We don't really solve a dilemma, we solve a problem. But what is important, we can stop here and say the mole machine, okay, we can criticize the methodology largely, but it's still descriptive. And I think this is the most important point here. That was descriptive ethics. And this is exactly what they say in their paper. What we're trying to do is descriptive ethics, not normative ethics. But then, just 1 month later, they published another paper with a more extended team. It's called the voting-based system, where they pretty much say, oh, by the way, no, we're going to automate decision-making. And I will give you the exact quote because otherwise people won't believe me. This is from the paper in 2016, The Social Dilemma. They say, to be clear, we do not mean that these 20 ethical questions can be solved by pulling the public and enforcing the majority opinion. Survey data will inform the construction of regulation of more algorithms for AVs, not dictate them. They seem to abide by the same rule in their 2018 paper, saying the following: what we are trying to show here is descriptive ethics, people's preferences in ethical decisions. But when it comes to normative ethics, which is how things should be done, that should be left to experts. And then 1 month later, they seem to have changed opinion because they say, represents a general approach to automating ethical decisions, drawing on machine learning and computational social choice. The starting point of our work was the realization that the mole machine data set can be used not just to understand people, but also to automate decisions. So I think this point is very important because here we have a clear issue for academics. We have a clear question of research integrity. This is what I've been defending in several papers, if you're interested by that. Still, again, not the topic of today, it was just quite a long introduction, but I wanted to tell you where it comes from. Why did we want to do this research and why is it important for us? The main point here is that although everybody tends to agree that we need better data, not more data, very deep inside, people don't believe that. And we think that's okay. You may have a good moral arguments, but these people, they have 39 million answers. So whatever the way they collected it, mistakes, approximations should be vanished in the aggregates. That's the main idea that we found many, many times with algorithms and also with statistics. And so the question we had was, let's talk about the quality here. If we are in a world where these kind of platforms, not only aggregating moral judgment, but also collecting moral judgments, civic platforms for deliberative process, are promised to a very good future, I think it is important to focus on the way we collect this decision process and also understand the endogeneity of the decision process. When we're collecting data, the collecting part of it is not independent from the data you collect. It is endogenous on the system, and so we have to also understand the best way to do so. So basically, how do we collect accurate moral judgments? Seems to be a simple question. It's much harder than it sounds. And then I'm going to tell you about the performative quantification, which is the experiments we've been conducting with Florian Kova. So the main research question we had, as you understood, is how do we design an optimal framework for collective decision making? When we mean here about optimal, it means on the first hand that we want to collect accurate judgments, not a priori opinions. If people say A today, we don't want them to say B tomorrow, sorry. So something that would be robust or consistent with time and also with objectives, with objections. Somebody gives you objections, you want to keep going with the same view. And also something that people would feel confident with. This is important for philosophy because what we're talking about here is moral judgments. So the performance, the accuracy of these moral judgments is also going to be important for the responsibility of the moral agents here. If you just give an answer, but you don't really believe in it, you will not feel responsible for it. The second point that we understand with optimal is the fact to assess the endogenous aspect of the data collection system, as I said. That is to say, if we know that this data collection process is not neutral, how can we frame it in such a way that we can achieve some goals? And some goals here, at least the one we had, was consensus. How can we frame it to get a better consensus across people? And also open-mindedness. If people disagree, at least can they better understand why others think differently, and can they better accept it? So we started with the classic dilemma. We just took the same design at the beginning than the one of the mode machine to compare our results. We surveyed, our survey was conducted on Qualtrics. We recruited people from Prolific. If I can just quickly say good words about Prolific. For people using Amazon Mechanical Turk, I highly recommend switching to Prolific. Much better quality and much better ethics from this company. That's it for the ads. So we had 17 cases. We surveyed 765 people here. And we wanted, in this first experiment, to check, to assess the importance of two design factors: the time to reply and the point of view. For the time to reply, we had different groups. Some of them were asked to do, so you had two sets of questions. First one, they take the 17 cases, and then they're required to take again the same cases, but with a randomization. But this time, the first time they were asked just to reply as quickly as possible. The second time, we forced them to take 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds or 40 seconds, according to groups, to see if like just the time they had to deliberate was of any impact. The second point was the point of view. The point of view, so we had one group, which was neutral, one group when we say, put yourself in the shoes of a designer of the algorithm. Another one was about citizens being part of a national consultation around these questions. And the fourth one, was about policymaker. You're drafting the regulation for autonomous vehicles. How would you decide about this? We had interesting results. The first one is that the time to reply doesn't seem to have any significant impact. So we were a bit disappointed about this, but at the same time, it's quite good news, first of all, for researchers. It's much less costly when you're doing this kind of research. So it saves money. And also, it's important for the civic platforms that aim to grow this kind of deliberative process. People don't need 20 minutes to come to a decision. They need just a few seconds. At least they don't need time, passive time, if you don't challenge them with something or have group discussions. The second point is that the point of view didn't seem to have any significant impact neither. And that was quite of a discovery, because if you're looking at the way that Judith Thompson actually addressed the dilemma of Philippa Foot, she could propose different solutions by changing the point of view around this. You will not have the same answer whether you're in the case of the steering driver and if you're the case of the bystander at the switch, for those who know a bit of this literature. So in philosophy, the point of view is very important, but here it didn't seem to have much impact on the way people do so, make decisions. The last point on this first experiment is that we noticed kind of a bias in the way that when people, when respondents were actually keeping the car on its lane, we realized that they were not really making a decision based on the two positions. They were rather refraining from making a decision. So they had this idea that if you don't touch it, if you just let it go, you would not be responsible for it. You're not really making a decision. I think this is a wrong perception of the facts, and I think Thompson agrees with me, because she says there's nothing such as a mode inertia. If you're in a situation, you're responsible for it, and you cannot just refrain from taking any action. So we had to address this point and to propose something different in terms of design to the respondents. Then we conducted a second experiment, more an exploratory one, where we wanted to know how people react if, so on the one hand, you give them these different scenarios, and on the other hand, you give the specific criteria. So instead of just saying, would you keep straight or swerve? In front of you, you have two girls. On the left, you have one old man and one dog. We wanted to ask them clearly, do you think that gender is a more relevant criteria to make such arbitration in this situation or not? And if so, do you think that we should spare men or women, and why? So on the first case, the first set of questions that they had the same dilemma as you saw before, and on the second one, we asked them directly these kind of questions. And we realized that actually, most of them would consider this criteria to be irrelevant. So I will give you just 4 examples here. The one on gender. So as you see here, you had the distribution, the horizontal distribution for the first questions, the people who keep going and kill the man or swerve and kill the woman. And vertically, you have the second set of questions, how these people replied after to the specific criteria. The first discovery that most of them consider this is irrelevant. Why is that important? It's important because if you read this from the perspective of Bonnefoy et al. In the more machine experiments, they would read this saying 86% of people choose to sacrifice the man over the woman. If you truly read this, as we observe it in this one, you say that only 21% of these people would do so, and 75% of people actually reject entirely this criteria. To give you a few more examples on body size, so the fat people versus fitter people, Bonnefoy et al. Would say that 52% of people sacrifice the fat versus slim. We found that only 19% of them would do so, and 79% reject the criteria. So social status, finally, 80% of people sacrifice homeless versus executive, according to the first framing. In the second one, they're only 21%, and 73% rejecting the criteria. So you can see that we have roughly 20% of the people who actually think this is relevant, and 75 to 80% of people who consider this irrelevant. Why is this important? It's important because the way you frame your experiment here is going to have tremendous implication in the interpretation of the results. On the one hand, you will force people to reply on things based on criteria they don't care about. It's like if I give you, would you rather kill your dog or have sex with your cats? I guess none of this. But if I really force you to reply, you will have to say something. And then I will say 75% of people consider that. This is not the right way to do. And so here, what we see is that we can design the whole collective decision process in such a way to actually make a consensus rather than force a dissensus across people. That was our first one. And then I will present you our last experiment, which is an experiment on, we had to change the whole design of it. So as I said, we noticed that we had this kind of bias in the observation, at least the bias as we wanted to observe it, because people associated not taking action with the fact of keeping straight. So we said we had to change it, and we came up with this new design I'm not especially proud of, but at least it's efficient, where you have this car exiting a tunnel, and then it cannot just keep straight. It has to go right or left and kill either the people on the right or on the left. In this one, as we saw that there were not much impact of the time, we just let people free time to reply and saying just do it as soon as possible. The fact that we didn't let the car go didn't impact, I mean, in addition to this, we offered people a third option, which is either you go right or you go left, or you select the random option. And I'd like to insist on this one. When we consider the random option here, it's not to say, oh, it's the easy way, we don't want to take a decision because we don't know what to do. This was the first critique that Patrick Lin made against randomization, but in his perspective, he didn't want just people to find an easy solution. I think here it's very different. On specific criteria, you can think that randomization makes sense because you're making the positive decision not to take a decision based on immoral criteria. So it's quite different. So what changed in this one, I said, different framing. Third option, we also had objections and discussions. So people took this, people addressed this dilemma first time, set one, then they were offered a few objections. Objections to classic justification, just to challenge them in their reason. Then they had a second set of the same scenario. Then they had a group discussion. 1 minute 30 for a group between 8 to 12 people to talk about these criteria. So 1 minute 30 per criteria times 7. And we had also had 3 subgroups in this one. So one control group, one group to which we also ask a degree of confidence at every time, at each step of the process, asking them how confident do you feel about your reply in this case. And finally, the last subgroup, we didn't ask them for confidence score, we asked them for justification. How would you justify your choice here? And the point here was not that much of like discovering the kind of justification they had. Actually, it was pretty much all the same. It was more about just trying to assess the impact of, do people think differently? Do people reply differently when they actually have to provide a justification? In terms of results, we didn't find any significant impact of just the fact to ask for justification of degree of confidence. So these statistically didn't impact, at least to what we observed, the reply themselves. However, the introduction of the random option had a massive impact on the replies. As you can see here, So you have here the replies for gender, age, body size, and social status, and their evolution from set 1 to set 3. And you can see, for instance, that in terms of age, so 45% of the respondents all across the 3 subsets chose the first option for age, the third option for age, sorry. In set 2, they were around 49%, and there was 56% in set 3. So you see that you can drastically, the objections in set 2 and the objections in set 2 and the discussion between set 2 and set 3 had actually an impact on this one. Second, properly talking about objections. Objections, as we saw, impacted significantly specific replies. So not all of them, they impacted specifically the replies where for what I consider to be irrelevant moral criteria and where people had to mostly choose the third options. But here it also impacted different kinds of what I would call meta answers, so what is all around the answer. It's not just about what you say, it's all about how you feel about it. And how you feel about it, we realize, as I presented here, that the confidence in the replies increase at each step of the process. So you see you have roughly a 3.52 average confidence all across replies for set 1. Then you have the objections. After objections, it raised to 3.78. After discussion, it raised to 4.22. So we do have a very significant impact of the objection and discussion on the confidence of people in their replies. The second point is about what we call the perceived consensus. So we ask people, how much do you think that other people would agree with you on this specific answer? And we started with 3.29 as an average for the first set. Then we had the objections. It decreased a bit to 3.24, so it's not very significant, but we can say that people objections increase the awareness of moral pluralism across people. And then when they do have the group discussion between set 2 and set 3, it drastically increases the confidence they have of the perceived consensus, because people actually talk together, they see that they actually agree on many things, and so they think that most people would agree with them. A last point on this one is that at every step of the process, for every single question, we have an increase, we have a decrease in the standard deviation, meaning that if we just take all the replies together, at every step of the process, we have a standard deviation that decreases, meaning that the distribution, the dispersion of the replies decreases. So we're driving a bit more toward a consensus across all groups. And finally, on this one, I want to tell you about the likelihood to buy an autonomous vehicle. And this one was perhaps one of the most important results we had. Completely certain across all groups and all experiments, we saw the same thing everywhere, which is that the more you ask people to think about this dilemma, the more you force people to question themselves, the least likely they are to buy an autonomous vehicle. So here you have the results for experiments. So we are still in experiment 3, the 3 subgroups, 1, 2, 3. In the first one, they only had objections and discussions. And you can see that in average, we're losing 0.23 points of confidence. So what was it? We basically asked people at the very beginning and at the very end of experiments, how likely would you be to buy an autonomous vehicle? So ranging from +2 is very, very likely, +1 is rather likely, no likely, no unlikely, rather unlikely, and very unlikely, from +2 to -2. And so we're losing 0.23 points, which is quite significant here, with just objections and discussions. And 24% of people actually downgraded the initial assumption. In the experience 2, we still have objection discussion, plus we ask people for degree of confidence. And then it's -0.35. We still, 24% of people downgraded the initial statements. And finally, when we have objections, discussions, and justification in the third experiment of the third experiment, the impact is quite significant. We have -0.48, with 35% of the people who actually downgrade the initial statements. Why is this important? It's important with regards to the whole perspective I introduced you at the beginning about the HMI, meaning that if we keep going with this idea that what we value the most morally is just landing autonomous vehicles on the market, we should not ask people to think about it. They should just buy it, don't think about it. At least if we buy about this perspective, that would be the point here. And just to conclude on this one, so we also compared the justification people give at the beginning, at the end. Why would you buy it or why would you not buy it? And at the end, and you have here on the northeast corner, the people who are initially were willing to buy it and then were not willing to buy it anymore. And we realized that actually the two main reasons why they don't want to buy it anymore is because of safety and loss of autonomy. So this also confirms that the reason why they changed their mind is kind of related to the question we asked them in the framing of these experiments. Here's my time to conclude. So I think three takes away here. First of all, design matters. I think we all agree on this one, but it matters on different grounds. So here we saw, based on our experiments at least, that the time to reply, the point of view, the degree of confidence, and the justification doesn't impact significantly the answer provided by the people. However, the introduction of this third option as a better, not a proxy for not replying, like keeping straight, but really asking people, okay, what is the right question? Do you think this is relevant or not? Impact very, very significantly the results we get. And finally, we have a moderate impact on the objections and discussions on the replies. This is just for the replies themselves. Second point, the design factor allows to build consensus instead of forcing dissensus. And I think this is perhaps the most important point of the presentation. We can change it in order to focus on what gathers us together, or we can choose to focus on what is dividing us. So from the introduction of the random option, we can emerge a large consensus to reject morally irrelevant criteria. And this is really much what I would like to emphasize on today. And finally, we also have the standard deviation that is decreasing across all answers. So basically, the more people think about it together, the more they reach together towards a consensus. Finally, design factors also allow us to strengthen more robust answers. And when we mean more robust answer here, we mean answers where people feel more confident in. At each step of the process, after objections, they feel more confident, even if they change their mind sometimes, which is quite interesting. And after discussion, mostly, they feel even more confident. So the whole process itself is important to not only say, this is what people think, but also making believe in what they think. And finally, the objections make people more aware of moral pluralism sometimes, even if the effect is not very important here, perhaps because the objections were not strong enough in their opinion. But group discussion does increase very significantly the perception of consensus. So this is not trivial. When we're designing a model for data collection, we should take all these perspectives have all these perspectives in mind, and also try to define what we aim to achieve, not only in terms of collecting the best answer, like the people feel the most related to, but also how can we make them converge towards something that is desirable for everybody. Thank you for your attention, and I'm ready to take your questions. Non. Ah, si. Je n'ai pas la souris. Il y a des questions? Yeah, I can totally leave the slides if needed. Je crois que c'est tout. Ok. C'est bon?
Okay, so thank you, Hubert, for this presentation. So one question was about access to the materials. So you said that you could share your presentation. And also there is a recording, so you will well access the presentation through this recording. If you have any question, you can drop your question in the chat, or just turn on your mic and ask Hubert your question. Well, I have one. I have one. So I would like to go back to my question about learning moral machines. Do you think it's conceivable that we could train machines to become moral from, well, the bias data sets, the bias set of human responses to moral dilemma, just like the dilemma of the MIT? Do you think it's possible to train moral machines?
I think many people have tried. So I'm quoted the voting-based system. There's another one more recent called Delphi, where people try also to do this. And to my perspective, this is absolutely impossible for one reason, because when we're doing so, it's not about the replies we try to get. And when we approach it this way, most of engineers approach it this way, they tend to fix it as a problem, which admits a solution. And so you need to find these solutions, which is a very realistic way of thinking. But in moral philosophy, we tend to see the problem from a different angle when we say, this is not about a problem to solve, it's about a dilemma. And there's no solution for a dilemma. You have to build an approach or reply that you feel confident with, and you can try to gather a consensus of people around you. So most importantly, when we talk about a moral decision, we talk about something that is made by the moral agents who is going to be responsible for it and can actually justify it. Like from Kant, this is quite obvious. I think we tend to pretty much all agree on this one. So very simple answer, but just saying it's not about the reply, it's about who's making the reply and who's going to assume the consequence of it. So I don't think so.
Okay. Any question in the chat?
I have a little question. You talked about time to reply, and you said that there's not. Thank you, Hubert, Etienne. Well, you talked about the time to reply, and you said that there are no real impact on the time. Is it something that we can conclude that there's no real reflection into the within this dilemma, or is it like more like a reflex? Is it is there a place for a reflection in that time set?
Thank you for mentioning this one, because I think I was not clear enough. So I want to avoid misunderstanding. We didn't find an effect from the statistical analysis we conducted here. Doesn't mean that there's no effects. I think this is also why I was saying all these great words about prolific is because I personally attended all the discussion they had. There were many, and I can attest that people really thought about it. They were really questioning it, and they were really engaged in this kind of discussion, so which was very positive for us. That's why I feel quite confident with their results. But we're still talking about statistical analysis here. It's not because it says something that it's definitely truth, if truth there is. That's why the main point we wanted to push here is more about, from a moral philosophy, I don't really care about statistics. From my point of view, I'm not going to be convinced by these results. But what was important is that when you're fighting results from another discipline with another approach, you also have to question the epistemic ground of this one. And if I say, to me, my moral reasoning has a better value than your statistical results, for me at least, in terms of knowledge production, the other people will disagree with that. And so how can we find also, common grounds to discuss this together with same epistemic values? And so that's also why I wanted to conduct its statistical analysis to say, even in your grounds on statistics, I can show you that we can largely impact it.
Thank you very much.
Any question? The floor is yours.
I was a little bit impressed to see that we will sacrifice homeless people instead of rich people. Is it something that that we have to be concerned about on the road?
I mean, once again, you can build pretty much any reply you want based on the framing, I think, of this experiment, and we see that with the Moore machine. To me, the biggest damage that the Moore machine did, besides just collecting data that could be used thereafter for training algorithms that would gain kind of some legitimacy in their results, is the fact that it puts in people's mind the idea that that would be relevant. I don't know how they come up with this criteria. And at some point they said, so the three researchers said, it's not because we use this criteria that they have to be the criteria at the end to be used. And I want to ask them, okay, so why did you conduct such an expensive experiments coming from the MIT, which is a highly regarded institution, and you telling people this is how you think based on criteria that they didn't choose? So just perhaps the authority of the MIT around this saying, this is what we do, and we know what we're doing because we're highly regarded researchers, and we say we should base it on gender, age, social status. So then they cannot just say, yes, perhaps we should not use this criteria. If we shouldn't use it, just don't do the experiments. And mostly don't train an algorithm then for consensus.
I see, thank you.
If there is no more question, we have to thank Hubert Etienne for visiting us in Montreal and delivering this great presentation with many insights, helpful insights. So thank you very much, Hubert. And as I wrote in the chat, I will send you a link in the next few days to the recording. So thank you, everyone, and we see you for the next session of this series of talks.